they had a little disclaimer sheet that they would have the person sign that says, I came into HR today and I reported XYZ, but I do not want HR to pursue an investigation. I do not want this to be taken any further. I just wanted HR to be on notice. And they thought that that was going to protect them in court. And I was like, there is no defense that says the employee didn't want you to complain. The only real strong defense is the minute we learned of it, we took prompt and effective remedial action. And so that's what you've got to come back to.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. You know, you never forget your first employment investigation, that is. I was a wet behind the ears HR rep in a healthcare setting, and I got a call in the middle of the night to respond to a patient's family's complaint about the nursing staff who were asleep on a unit when they were supposed to be monitoring patients. That was more than 30 years ago, and I'd probably cringe today if I reviewed my notes or read that report. I kind of wish I did have it. But I did manage to conduct the investigation without getting us sued, and I got the bug. Employment-related investigations are still my favorite. Give me a supervisor who can't keep his hands to himself, and I've got a great day ahead of me. And joining me today to discuss workplace investigations is Leah Stiegler. Leah is a principal in the Richmond, Virginia office of the law firm Woods Rogers, where she focuses her practice on counseling and representing employers in state and federal court. She also provides custom design training for employers and co-hosts the Woods Rogers video series on YouTube called What's the T in L&E? Welcome to Good Morning HR, Leah.
Thank you, Mike. It's been my lifelong dream to be here with you today. So I'm very excited to tell you about all my woes, my mistakes during investigations, and all the fun things I've learned through them.
Well, let's just start with what's your craziest workplace investigation? That's the first thing at a dinner party or something. First thing when they find out what I do, somebody wants to know. Okay, so tell me the craziest thing you've seen.
Oh,
what's yours?
Yeah. So as a management side employment lawyer, sometimes I'm actually doing the investigations and other times I'm kind of, one step away appointing the investigator who's going in and interviewing it. And I'm kind of monitoring the scope and the issues and all that. But recently we had one where we represented an apartment complex and the investigation started with the property manager who was claiming that they were being sexually harassed by basically a third-party consultant that was coming in to kind of monitor and assess the complex and give the ownership company an idea of why it wasn't doing so well. Basically, the ownership company said, hey, come on in here. We want you guys to give us a rundown of the good, the bad, and the ugly so that we can improve our profits and all that.
Right.
Well, while this was going on, the property manager starts submitting all these really egregious sexual harassment claims against the third-party company, including something like, alleging that one of the consultants made comments to her about, oh, can we rent one of these rooms for an hour? And then making very racially derogatory comments about, the demographics of the people renting and all that. Well, it turns out after we start investigating, the claimant was really there trying to cover up her own misgivings and try to get ahead of it. She was doing everything she could to get the consultants off site because it turns out in the end of it, she was basically, a bunch of the apartments were not rented out and officially, right? But then when you looked into it, they were occupied and their rent checks were going somewhere, not into the central system. So you can presume that maybe the property manager may or may not allegedly have had something to do with, renting out apartment rooms and pocketing for herself the rent checks and not putting them in the system. So that was kind of a wild one. You never get you rarely get the 180 to happen.
Yeah, well, and one of mine is really similar. And I think a lot of us have seen something like it. It was, sexual harassment allegation. In fact, it was a rape allegation, and lady had actually filed a police report, and this was a large, very conservative religious organization. And I went in, and the complaint was against the print shop manager and from a female who was part of the clerical staff, reporting to one of the upper echelon people in this very conservative religious group. And I start the investigation. I get her statement, and she gives me the names of other people who she thought would be corroborating witnesses. And so I start talking to them, and they're all like, "Oh no, she was like chasing him a lot and talking to him. And by the way, he was also dating this person, and we think he was fooling around with this guy was a Romeo, and he was making his way around the organization, but everybody who saw any of their interactions said she was chasing him."
Oh.
And so I finally sit down with him, and he comes clean. Yeah, this is, we had an affair, blah, 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 and she's married. And she freaked out when her husband started asking. And for some reason, he figured out something had happened one day, and he had basically forced her to call the police because he believed she told him she was assaulted. And then it went on, and it got into the workplace, and this guy was a Romeo, but she ultimately, right there, when I laid all this out, she rescinded it in writing, her complaint, and then I give my report to this organization, and I think they fired about half a dozen people.
Oh my
because they were
gosh.
so conservative that these people who are having extramarital affairs and doing all these other things were just outside their bailiwick.
Right.
And I felt bad for these poor witnesses who just had told me stuff, had told me, we're trying to do the right thing, but it was a wackadoodle day. I mean, I got almost all of that done in one day, and it was like all my children or something.
Right.
I was watching my grandmother's stories. It was something else. Yeah.
You just can never guess where your investigation is going to go and what results you're going to get. And I'd say, you could have the exact same sexual harassment allegation in two different places at two different times, where an employee is claiming another employee, physically touched them inappropriately or whatnot. But because the characters at play are so different and the nature of the workforce is so different, it's always going to be a different result. And so something like that, I'm curious how you got her to sign that written statement.
She wrote it. She wasn't on board with the way this thing was going. And once I laid it out and told her what everybody had said, what he had said, and all her body language. I mean, she was even nodding her head. She was agreeing, and it was everything they teach you about, the neurolinguistics and everything. She was doing it. And so I just said, "So why did you make up this story?" And she just poured it out there.
Wow.
And or I said, "Why did you have to go to? Why did you feel like you had to go to the police?" Something like that. And she just poured it out there, and I just pushed the legal pad across the mat and said, "Just write it down and explain it. We'll work this out."
Yeah. The other interesting thing about that is you get, sometimes you're looking from an investigation standpoint at one individual making one accusation against one other employee. But then when you start to look at it, the scope of your investigation just expands and expands and expands. I recently had one where an employee filed a conflicts of interest complaint against another person and in the organization. And the scope just got bigger and bigger, just kind of looking at how far back do we go, and what we went down kind of, different areas where there were tangential issues that involved that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, by the end of it, I said, wow, this was something in my head. I was originally thinking this is going to be like a 3 or 4 page investigative report, right? 2 or 3 witnesses, but no,
Right.
it ends up being a 20-page report with 30 witnesses. So,
well, and that's often, you're talking to all these different witnesses, and I'll often end it, "Hey, is there anything else you think that management ought to know about what's going on?" And sometimes you just keep pulling at that sweater, and it just keeps unraveling, and there's more and more, and then you have to go to the client and say, "Do you want to pay for this? Do you want to pay for this? What do how much time do you want to spend on this?" But it gets legit. But let's start there. When those kind of open-ended questions where people start volunteering, but a lot of us in HR have had that experience where somebody knocks on the door and says, "Hey, I don't want you to do anything about this, but you should know." And of course, all they're doing is pulling the pin on the hand grenade and throwing it across the HR desk because now you've got to do something and you're going to be the bad guy. When does that kind of rumor, or I heard this, or I said this, when does that become something that somebody needs to investigate?
Oh, that's a great question. Like, when do you have a complaint that needs to happen? Well, I mean, to protect the organization, right? Anyone who is a management level employee is going to be deemed the company. And so the standard is really, once the company is on notice that offensive conduct that may be deemed harassment, right, is happening, or once the company knew or should have known, so should have known is in there too, and that's an interesting one. The company has an obligation to take prompt and effective legal action, and so that could generally, it looks like when it comes in the form of a harassment complaint, conducting an investigation, maybe putting someone on administrative leave while you conduct it, taking in full evidence, giving everyone an opportunity to respond to the allegations and provide their side of the story, and then coming up with a remedial response, which could be anything from training to termination, right? Or disciplinary action of some sort. But I think it's hard because a lot of times I'll have clients who will say, do I really need to investigate this? And I'm like, is this the have we gotten to the standard where we know something is potentially happening, or we should have known? Whether that's a manager seeing offensive conduct happen, somebody reporting it directly to them or to HR, or whether, they hear rumors and gossip about it. I had an interesting one for a firehouse years ago where
I bet those are hot messes.
Oh
I
my
can only
God.
imagine.
I was going to say, if I had $1 for every time I had a firehouse investigation, I'd probably have $5. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, think about the culture of that workplace, right? It's intimate. Employees are working 24-hour shifts. They're in sleeping quarters there. They're eating together. They're watching movies, whatever it may be. And this was a situation where you had a young girl who was a junior firefighter, 16 years old, hanging out at the firehouse. Yep, that is a thing.
That's a recipe for disaster, yeah.
I'm glad you say that, because we thought that was obvious too, but the firehouse did not think that was obvious. I mean, basically, there were rumors going around that she was having an intimate relationship with one of the 26-year-old male firefighters. And employees had basically observed them going to the movies together. Someone observed them coming out of the sleeping area to like the men's sleeping area together. So this young girl, her parents actually filed a lawsuit against the firehouse, a negligence lawsuit. And when we conducted an investigation, the chief of the fire station was like, well, yeah, I mean, I had heard rumors and gossip, but that's just hearsay. And, I don't deal with gossip. I'm above gossip. And I was like, okay, that's the should have known standard right there. That is like prima facie, you should have known that something terrible was happening or, potentially happening, and should have gotten into it.
So, the other thing is, I see a lot is the complaint doesn't directly address a legal issue. It's a violation of policy or whatever else, or just, something that's creating a really negative workplace culture, but it's not Title VII protected or anything like that. And employers kind of just push that stuff off. And then situations grow, and now, and maybe it does turn into a Title VII issue or some sort of other discrimination where I'm getting in trouble, employee B is getting in trouble for the same conduct that we've put up with for, employee A for a long time. And so it doesn't even always have to be strictly a legal violation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's both sides to that, right? I mean, I think you never get a perfect harassment complaint. I mean, that is so rare. I bet you'd agree with me that
straight quid pro quo or something.
Yeah, and that it's very clear. It's in writing to the HR department saying, here's what happened, who, what, where, when, why. And I feel like I'm being harassed at work, whatever. Normally it does come in a vague statement of some sort. I'm giving an example of, a manager who disciplines an employee or gives them a bad annual review. The employee goes to HR and says, I just feel like my manager is really targeting me. It feels like a very toxic work culture. And I'm just feeling really stressed. Maybe I'm being treated differently, but they're not using any trigger words like harassment, discrimination, retaliation. And, in one sense, you might say as an empathetic HR professional, well, let's just talk through that. Let me, walk you through and kind of empathize with you about this annual review or whatnot. But the other part of you should be saying, well, do I have something more here? Is someone saying they feel uncomfortable and unfair? Because if we don't investigate that and we don't take any prompt and effective remedial action, and there may be none, right? Then if this individual were to file a lawsuit later, they're going to easily be able to make the argument that the employer at least should have known that by that vague complaint to HR, they were on notice that offensive conduct might have been happening.
Yeah, and there's no magic. It's like the ADA. There are no magic words. You don't have to say these specific things to have a valid issue that somebody needs to investigate.
I love that you use the term magic words, because I do think that because of social media or whatever, people know what the magic words are now. So the other side of that is I feel like I'm getting more clients that are coming to me saying, this employee filed a harassment complaint or a discrimination complaint or retaliation. And when I read the substance of the complaint, it has nothing to do with harassment on the basis of sex or race or age or anything like that. It's just, yeah, my manager's really hard on me, but I'm going to classify it as harassment. And then the company feels like they have an obligation to address it. And so sometimes you may get something that's masked as something you really formally should investigate, but you don't necessarily have to when you look at the substance of it.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. At Imperative, we help risk-averse clients make well-informed decisions about the people they involve in their business. And because our research is thorough, our reporting is robust, and our compliance is strict, our clients can take action on the information we provide. And when they call us with a question, we answer the phone and get them what they need with fast and friendly service. You can learn more about how we serve our clients at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 187 and enter the keyword intake. That's INTAKE. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Leah Stiegler. I spend way too much time on Reddit. And everything on Reddit in the employment related subreddits is retaliation. Everything's retaliation. And every now and then I pipe in and say, well, retaliation in and of itself isn't illegal unless you're related to protected activity of some sort. Just because you getting in trouble for a performance management issue may be retaliation for you being a crappy employee. That's, but it's not illegal, right? And so, but that's always everything, those magic words on the internet are all over and people know, how to say them and they think you're going to scare HR. And I think increasingly that's, and I think there was a time, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, if you used the magic words, they would assume you were talking to an employment law attorney and they gave you those words to use. Now, oh yeah, you know how to use Google or ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, that's a big one. You can put in all sorts of things in on there and type in, I want to submit a formal complaint to my HR manager, and here are the topics I want to address. And ChatGPT comes up with a great thing. Not that I've done this, Mike, but I have played around with it with my colleagues. Okay, just to be clear.
Yeah. Well, but that's and you said you said formal complaint, and that's the other thing is I'm not doing a formal complaint. I just wanted to bring this up. When you're talking to your clients and about starting an investigation, and that person says, I don't want to be involved. I just want you to know. I want confidentiality. I just want you to know this is going on. What would you tell? What's the script when somebody tells you, I'm telling you this confidentially?
Yeah. Well, that is a really hard one because that does happen a lot. I'm just venting to you, but I don't want you to do anything about it because I don't want someone to get in trouble or whatever. I just want it to stop. Okay, well, how do we make it stop, right? I think it's as easy as sort of, addressing the fact that, I absolutely hear you and I understand your concerns, but I also want to make sure that you understand that we have fair, non-retaliatory processes to address this. We're going to look at this fairly. We may even bring in someone from the outside to take a look at this. And this is standard procedure. I can assure you that, you know, because you reported this, nothing negative will happen to you because of that report. But we as a company may have an obligation to take a deeper dive and look at this, and we want to make sure that we are doing the right thing for you and for other employees. Because if it's not you, then it might be another employee that complains about it as well. So something as simple as that, I think, is perfectly fine. You can't unhear it.
Yeah, that's the problem. And if the person is reporting on behalf of somebody else that they think is being treated unfairly and all of that, you know, I've said in the past, you know, I'll do everything I can to keep your name out of this, but there's always a chance there's going to be litigation in this, and there's,
Yep.
you know, I can't at that point guarantee anything, and you know, but you know, if you're just a concerned third party, you know, I can try, but the other thing you have to remember is now you've told me this and I have to start an investigation. And we have a company policy that says all employees must cooperate with an investigation. Even if you're the one who started it, you can't back out now, you know, because I've heard that. Oh, I want to rescind my complaint. No,
Yep.
we don't do that now.
I had a client that very creatively, if an employee came to them and made a complaint, or another employee wanted to report something that happened to another employee but didn't want an investigation to happen, they had a little disclaimer sheet that they would have the person sign that says, I came into HR today and I reported XYZ, but I do not want the HR to pursue an investigation. I do not want this to be taken any further. I just wanted HR to be on notice. And they thought that that was going to protect them in court. And I was like, there is no defense that says the employee didn't want you to complain. I don't know where you get that. Maybe that's down a Reddit hole or something like that.
Yeah.
The only real strong defense is the minute we learned of it, we took prompt and effective remedial action. And so that's what you've got to come back to.
You know, I've got a strong bias against trying or for trying to get the person giving me the information, whether it's a complainant or just, you know, interested third party informant or whatever, to put it in writing. What's your take on that? I know some people like to have HR write it up and have that person sign it. What's your preference?
Yeah, I would prefer something in writing by the employee, because I think that gives a good that's a good kickoff for the investigator, whoever's going to come in and investigate it, to have that to start with. And I always recommend starting with the complainant and getting really a full understanding of their allegations, so you can really flush out every aspect of their complaint. I'm not really a huge stickler for getting something in writing from the complainant. And mainly that's because as long as I have an idea that they've reported something generally, I think a good investigator is going to be able to flush out that complaint and then go back to the company after that initial interview and say, so here are the things that came up during this interview, which goes back to what you said earlier, which is sometimes the question is, you know, is there anything else you want me to let management know or that you think management should know? And so then go back to the company and say, okay, here's what I think the scope of this investigation should be. These 3 issues to look into. But I don't know, what's your take on that?
No, I think you're right. If I like it in writing because I've just had too many situations over the years where the story's changed. And so I want to pin everybody down to a story, starting with the complainant or the informant or whatever. And people, when they're putting it in black and white, tend to be more direct than, you know, trying to be vague. And I don't want to, you know, chase them down or have that story changed later. Well, I didn't really mean that. Well, now I've got what you wrote down. And so I'm a big believer in that. But so what about those situations where the complaint doesn't warrant an investigation, where you just see on its face, this is not a violation of company policy. This is not, you know, your manager's allowed to have a bad day sometimes, you know, or, you know, if your coworkers don't like to have lunch with you, they just don't like to have lunch with you. Okay. You know, maybe check your grooming. I don't know, but this is not, this is not elementary school. We're not going to, always, police that kind of behavior. how do you handle those circumstances where somebody really thinks that they've been treated unfairly, but on its face, there's nothing legally or even on the company culture or that, policy
Sure.
side.
Yeah, I'll do it through an example. So I love your coworkers just don't like you. They don't want to have lunch with you comment. I had a situation where an employee filed a complaint that she felt like she was being excluded on the basis of gender because on St. Patrick's Day, her male coworkers went out to like O'Toole's bar or whatever
Mm-hmm.
for a beer after work. Well, they just didn't like her. And
Right.
they were all in a fantasy football league and they were doing their own thing, that they were just like a good group of friends. And it wasn't a workplace sanctioned activity in any way. So the client, the HR person that received this complaint, they knew very well the dynamics of the workplace and the situation, and that these male employees were friends and had this league and all that. And they just simply, we sort of talked about, they just simply documented internally kind of the basis for why no investigation was necessary. And then I do think some transparency to the complainant is appropriate. I don't know what your take is on this, and I think it depends on the investigation, but I think too often people think that when they make a complaint, they're going to get your investigative report and the results of what you do and the personnel file of the accused and whatever it may be. Because you'll do an investigation and maybe it doesn't warrant termination. And so they see that accused person coming in every day and nothing happens. Or in this case, nothing happened. No one was disciplined for not going out to inviting her out to the bar. So they want transparency. And I think going back to that person and having that tough conversation of saying, I understand your concern. We will definitely be mindful of exclusion. This was not a work sanctioned event. And we, will sort of address these things as they come up, but let us know if anything comes up in the future. But unfortunately, this doesn't entail an investigation.
I always wonder sometimes, am I giving them a playbook to do a better complaint next time? That's it's so yeah, I'm kind of cautious on that. But the reality is sometimes it doesn't. And maybe though, this is an opportunity, a learning opportunity for this employee. Maybe we can coach them on, okay, tell me what the rest of the dynamic is and tell me, what's going on in that workplace. What are you contributing to that? Because that's always the thing. Nobody really thinks they're contributing to any of the environment. It's always, they're always the subject of it. But, looking for ways to coach that employee and, maybe have a word with that supervisor, that manager, just saying, hey, you've got this dynamic going on. You may want to keep, an ear out to see if there's ways to do some team building or something where, somebody doesn't feel like they're being left out. And when when it's guys and a woman, you really definitely want to make sure that those bros don't bring that into the workplace and
Right.
exclude her from projects or from information she might need, things like that.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think the investigation is just one part of the story. But I mean, from an HR standpoint, you're really responsible for not alone, right, with management for ensuring that the workplace has a healthy culture. And so if employees have that sentiment, they could be the, what is it, the wolf that cries wolf all the time.
The boy who cried wolf.
Boy who
Yeah,
cries
yeah.
wolf. Thank you. Yeah, not the wolf who's crying wolf. My goodness. But at the same time, they could have a valid, legitimate concern. And like you said, maybe there is an issue or a dynamic going on in the workplace that's unhealthy. So sometimes I think asking a couple questions, and then even if you decide when you're talking to the manager to see if the manager is aware of any inappropriate dynamic or gender-based concerns, or maybe talk to one other employee. And if it doesn't go anywhere, I would document that and indicate we found no reason to continue a formal investigation.
And we were going to talk about investigations, and we've gotten half an hour into this, and we've just talked about intake. Okay, so but I think it's important because it gets screwed up a lot. But how long, especially on a complaint that you're not going to take action on, what's your record retention policy on that?
Oh, that's interesting. I would keep it the entire life cycle of the employee in the personnel file. And then I always recommend for as long as you keep the personnel file, and that may depend by state, but I mean, you never go wrong with 5 years.
Right. And so you said personnel file. What's your opinion about having separate investigation files versus personnel files? Does it depend on who's got access or what?
I would say it probably depends on who's got access. I don't really see a significant legal issue with either one practice or the other. My only concern is if you have something in separate investigation files, what if you've got different HR people or different managers coming in, and there's been a complaint in 2018 against, John Doe, and then again in 2020 against John Doe, and these are all going into a separate investigative file and nothing is in John Doe's file, then when new HR person comes along in 2024 and gets a new complaint, they're not going to have, unless they have some cleaned up way to really look to see if other similar complaints have been filed. I'd like to make sure that they can also tell if there's a pattern or practice of issues going on as well. So whatever's easiest for the company, where they can make sure they're keeping, being mindful of that.
Well, perfect. That's all the time we've got. Thank you for joining me, Leah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for listening. You can comment on this episode at goodmorninghr.com or on your favorite social media platform. And if you enjoyed this episode, please write us a review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. It helps us reach more listeners. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Marianne Hernandez, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey, as always. Please don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.